Night fell heavy on the valley, the smoke hanging thick like a curtain that choked every breath, the stars above hidden by the haze of war. The soldiers crouched among the ruins, their weapons ready, their eyes strained for movement, but their thoughts, all drifting upward toward the sky where the shadow of the A-10 circled like a guardian made of steel. The roar of its engines comforted them more than words could, though none of them had ever seen the face of the one who guided it they clung to. The presence above as if it were the last thread between them and death. The commander moved among his men, giving orders, checking positions, but his mind was clouded with doubt, his radio still warm against his palm, the last words of the pilot echoing. Through him, "Prepare for the final wave. Trust me completely." He had asked for her name, demanded it even, but the silence that followed had been a knife in his chest. He wanted to believe she was flesh and blood, a soldier like them, bound by duty. Yet, her actions, her skill, her knowledge, they belonged to something far beyond the realm of ordinary war. The men whispered stories while they waited for the storm. Some swore the pilot was an angel sent to deliver them. Others claimed she was a ghost of war, a soul bound to the sky forever. Some said she was a legend, a myth reborn to fight again. Their voices carried fragments of hope, yet also fear, because none of them truly knew. And mystery is a dangerous thing on the battlefield. It can inspire, but it can also haunt. The horizon glowed faint with the lights of movement. The enemy was massing again, their silhouettes stretching across the darkness, columns of men and machines, advancing with relentless purpose. The ground trembled as their weight pressed forward the final wave. The one that would decide. Everything was coming closer with each heartbeat, and the commander felt the air tighten around him as if the valley itself held its breath. The A-10 Dove, suddenly engines thundering, its cannon roaring as it struck the front line of the advancing force. Explosions erupted across the dark terrain, fire lighting the night like a second sun. The soldiers on the ground shouted in defiance, surging with courage as they fired into the advancing shadows. Yet even as the flames rose, the enemy did not stop. They pushed forward as though endless waves born from the earth itself. Missiles screamed upward, chasing the A-10, and again the pilot moved with impossible grace, twisting, rolling, diving between the trails of fire. The soldiers below could not comprehend what they saw. The aircraft should have been torn apart, yet it danced through the storm as if guided by something more than human hands. The commander stared in silence, his pulse hammering, because the truth pressed harder upon him with every maneuver. This was no ordinary warrior. Then the radio crackled again. The voice came soft and cold, telling him to hold the line for 10 more minutes. 10 minutes, she said, and the tide would turn. He wanted to believe, but he needed answers. He demanded them now. "Who are you? Why are you here? What are you?" And the reply came with a calmness that froze his blood. "I am here because you were never meant to be abandoned." Her words cut through the smoke like blades. The commander faltered because those words meant knowledge beyond the battlefield. Knowledge of decisions made in rooms far away. Knowledge of orders sealed and carried by men of power. She knew too much. She spoke, as if she had seen what even he had not, the truth that they had been sent here to die as pawns, and that truth chilled him deeper than the enemy fire around him. The battle grew savage as the enemy closed in. Fire erupted across the valley, the soldiers, locked in desperate combat. The A-10 tore through the ranks above them, its fury relentless, yet the enemy numbers seemed infinite. The commander shouted for his men to hold, but his voice cracked under the weight of what pressed upon him his heart, torn between the mystery above and the survival below. Another missile streaked into the sky, this one faster, sharper, impossible to dodge. The soldiers cried out as it locked onto the A-10, and for a moment, the commander believed the miracle would end. But the plane pulled a maneuver no one had ever seen. Before, it tilted on its side, skimmed the ridge so close its wings sliced through dust and stone, and the missile collided with the mountainside, exploding harmlessly in fire. The soldiers were stunned, breathless, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed, and the whispers began again. No human could fly like that. The commander turned his eyes upward, the plane climbing once more, its silhouette burning against the night. And he felt his throat tighten with the weight of questions he could not ignore if she was not part of them. If she was not from headquarters, if she was not even bound by human limits, then what was she? What force had descended into their impossible mission? Why did she fight for them when all the world had abandoned them? The radio sparked once more, and the voice returned firmer, now sharper, like the edge of steel. She said, "The final strike is coming. Brace yourselves, and when it comes, you will see what should never be seen." The words sank into the commander like stones, heavy, unshakable, terrifying. He tried to ask again for answers, but the channel went dead, leaving only static and the growl of engines circling above. The soldiers crouched low weapons, raised eyes fixed on the horizon. The commander gripped his rifle tighter, sweat cold against his skin, his heart pounding with dread, not only for the enemy that surged closer, but for the truth that waited hidden in the sky. The pilot was about to reveal something, and whatever it was would change everything they believed about this war and about the one who had come to save them. Night fell heavy on the valley, the smoke hanging thick like a curtain that choked every breath, the stars above. Hidden by the haze of war, the soldiers crouched among the ruins, their weapons ready, their eyes strained for movement, but their thoughts all drifting upward toward the sky, where the shadow of the A-10 circled like a guardian made of steel. The roar of its engines comforted them more than words could. Though none of them had ever seen the face of the one who guided it, they clung to the presence above, as if it were the last thread between them and death. The commander moved among his men, giving orders, checking positions, but his mind was clouded with doubt, his radio still warm against his palm. The last words of the pilot echoing through him, "Prepare for the final wave. Trust me completely." He had asked for her name, demanded it even, but the silence that followed had been a knife in his chest. He wanted to believe she was flesh and blood, a soldier like them bound by duty, yet her actions, her skill, her knowledge, they belonged to something far beyond the realm of ordinary war. The men whispered stories while they waited for the storm. Some swore the pilot was an angel sent to deliver them. Others claimed she was a ghost of war, a soul bound to the sky forever. Some said she was a legend, a myth reborn to fight again. Their voices carried fragments of hope, yet also fear, because none of them truly knew, and mystery is a dangerous thing on the battlefield. It can inspire, but it can also haunt. The horizon glowed faint with the lights of movement. The enemy was massing again there, silhouettes stretching across the darkness, columns of men and machines advancing with relentless purpose. The ground trembled as their weight pressed forward the final wave. The one that would decide everything was coming closer with each heartbeat, and the commander felt the air tighten around him as if the valley itself held its breath. The A-10 Dove suddenly, engines thundering, its cannon roaring as it struck the front line of the advancing force. Explosions erupted across the dark terrain, fire lighting the night. Like a second sun, the soldiers on the ground shouted in defiance, surging with courage as they fired into the advancing shadows. Yet even as the flames rose, the enemy did not stop. They pushed forward as though endless waves. Born from the earth itself, missiles screamed upward, chasing the A-10, and again the pilot moved with impossible grace, twisting, rolling, diving between the trails of fire. The soldiers below could not comprehend what they saw. The aircraft should have been torn apart. Yet it danced through the storm as if guided by something more than human hands. The commander stared in silence, his pulse hammering because the truth pressed harder upon him with every maneuver. This was no ordinary warrior. Then, the radio crackled again. The voice came soft and cold, telling him to hold the line for 10 more minutes. 10 minutes, she said, and the tide would turn. He wanted to believe, but he needed answers. He demanded them now. Who are you? Why are you here? What are you? And the reply came with a calmness that froze his blood. I am here because you were never meant to be abandoned. Her words cut through the smoke like blades. The commander faltered because those words meant knowledge beyond the battlefield. Knowledge of decisions made in rooms far away. Knowledge of orders sealed and carried by men of power. She knew too much. She spoke as if she had seen what even he had not, the truth that they had been sent here to die as pawns, and that truth chilled him deeper than the enemy fire around him. The battle grew savage as the enemy closed in. Fire erupted across the valley, the soldiers locked in desperate combat. The A-10 tore through the ranks above them, its fury relentless, yet the enemy numbers seemed infinite. The commander shouted for his men to hold, but his voice cracked under the weight of what pressed upon him, his heart torn between the mystery above and the survival below. Another missile streaked into the sky, this one faster, sharper. Impossible to dodge, the soldiers cried out as it locked onto the A-10, and for a moment, the commander believed the miracle would end, but the plane pulled a maneuver no one had ever seen before it tilted on eye. The valley fell into an eerie stillness after the first wave of destruction, the smoke curling into the sky like dark fingers clawing at the heavens. The soldiers on the ground stood in disbelief, some catching their breath, others staring upward at the circling A-10 as though they were seeing a vision rather than a machine of war. They whispered among themselves, their voices shaking with both awe and uncertainty. Their rifles clutched tight, because the battle was not yet over, and they all knew it. The silence was only the breath before the storm returned. From beyond the ridges came a rumble deeper than thunder. It began with a single thud, then another, and then a chorus of impacts as artillery shells rained down into the valley. The enemy had not broken. They had only retreated to draw new strength, and now that strength came crashing like a tide. The ground trembled beneath the soldiers' boots. Rocks split apart, earth splintered open. Men were thrown to the ground as explosions ripped through their ranks, and the commander shouted for them to hold fast, to stay low, and to remember that as long as the A-10 flew above them, they still had a chance. The mysterious pilot did not hesitate. The engines screamed as the beast tilted. Low diving straight into the storm of artillery fire shells, streaking past like fiery spears. The soldiers gasped because no one had ever seen such recklessness. No pilot dared fly headlong into the teeth of anti-air fire. And yet this one did with a steadiness that seemed almost impossible. The A-10 unleashed its cannon again, shells carving a fiery trail across the ridges, silencing the guns one after another. The sky split with smoke and flame, but the plane emerged unscathed, its wings cutting through the chaos like a blade. The enemy below panicked once more, scrambling to bring up heavier weapons, men dragging launchers from caves and bunkers, desperate to tear the A-10 from the sky. The commander watched through his scope as the weapons, locked on missiles, fired upward, screaming trails of light slicing through the smoke. The soldiers below cried out, thinking it was over. But the A-10 twisted with a grace that defied its bulk, rolling sharply, dipping low, skimming the ridges so close. The mountains themselves seemed to tremble. then climbing again in a sharp arc as the missiles collided into the rocks, exploding harmlessly in showers of fire. Gasps of disbelief rose among the soldiers. Never had they seen such flying. The A-10 was a beast built for strength, not agility, and yet in the hands of this pilot, it moved as though alive, darting, weaving, turning the laws of its design, bent by the will of the one within. It was not skill alone. It was something greater, a force that pushed beyond training, beyond instinct, something that left even hardened warriors speechless. The commander felt a cold weight in his chest. He knew this was no ordinary pilot, whoever she was. Her skill bordered on the impossible. She flew as though she knew the battlefield before it unfolded, anticipating every strike, every movement of the enemy, as though she could read their thoughts. He wanted to believe it was only mastery born of countless hours, but in his gut, he sensed something more, something unexplainable, something that raised the hairs on his neck. The enemy would not yield. They brought forward armor from hidden bunkers, steel beasts with cannons, mounted turrets grinding forward to crush the soldiers in the valley. The commander called for his men to prepare for the onslaught, but before they could, the A-10 swooped low, its cannon blazing, tearing through the armor with relentless fury. Explosions erupted one after another, flames licking the ridges and black smoke blotting out the sun. The soldiers cheered, their voices rising with desperate hope. Yet even as they celebrated, the commander kept his eyes on the sky because he knew this pilot was still a mystery wrapped in fire. The radio crackled at last, not from the pilot but from headquarters demanding updates on the battle. The commander shouted back about the A-10, the savior that had arrived without orders, and the silence that followed from the other end was chilling. Headquarters insisted no air support had been dispatched, no pilot had been authorized, no craft was anywhere near their sector. According to every record, the sky was empty. The commander froze, the truth striking him harder than any shell. If headquarters had not sent this pilot, then where had she come from? And what was her purpose on a battlefield abandoned as impossible? His men believed they had been blessed, but he knew blessings did not come wrapped in steel and fury. There was a reason for this arrival, and it would reveal itself soon. The A-10 climbed high into the smoke, its silhouette a shadow against the bleeding sky. Then, for the first time, the radio in the commander's hand sparked with a voice faint but clear, and unlike any he had heard before. It was calm, unwavering, and undeniably female, a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. "Hold the line," she said, "and I will carve you a path." The words were few, but they struck like thunder through his heart. A woman was at the helm of this machine, a woman who had entered a battle that had been condemned as lost, who had thrown herself into the fire with no orders, no backup, no reason except one that she had not yet revealed. The soldiers on the ground did not hear the voice, only the commander did, and he stood frozen. Because now the mystery had a face, though hidden. It had a voice that demanded belief. Above the valley, the engines roared again, the A-10 banking toward the horizon where new threats gathered unseen. The commander lifted his eyes to follow its path, his chest burning with questions and with fear. Because the voice had promised more, and promises in war always came with a price. He gripped his rifle tighter, his men looking to him for direction. But he had no answers, only the certainty that whatever force had brought this mysterious pilot into their doomed mission was not done yet, and the storm had only begun to rise. The voice still echoed in the commander's mind, calm and steady, a voice that should have belonged to a distant ally. But no name, no call sign, no origin had been given, and as the A-10 roared back into the sky, he felt the weight of the mystery sink deeper into his bones. The soldiers below had no idea who guided the steel beast above their heads. They only knew that death had been pushed back for the moment, and hope had risen where despair once ruled. Yet hope built on mystery was fragile, and fragile hope could break at any second. The battle seemed to slow, though it never truly ceased. Sporadic gunfire still cracked from the ridges, but the enemy had pulled back, retreating to regroup. The commander watched them vanish into the smoke, his instincts screaming that this pause was a trap, that something far worse waited beyond the ridges, and his suspicion was confirmed. When the radio sparked again with that same voice, it was sharper now, more urgent, though still unshaken. She spoke of enemy reinforcements hidden beyond the far mountains. She warned that convoys were already rolling heavy armor and supply trucks, engines snarling as they prepared to crush the valley with overwhelming force. The commander froze because no reconnaissance had reported such reinforcements. No satellite, no drone, no scout had returned with word of this threat. Yet she spoke of it with certainty, as if she could see beyond the horizon, as if her eyes pierced walls and smoke and distance. He wanted to doubt her, yet her arrival had already turned the impossible into survival, and her every move in the sky had defied reason. So he relayed her warning to his men, their faces tightening with dread because they understood that what they had faced so far was only the beginning. The soldiers readied themselves, weapons gripped tight backs, pressed to broken walls, eyes fixed. On the ridges that concealed the coming storm, the commander raised his scope scanning the haze, and at first he saw nothing, only smoke and ruin, but then faint outlines emerged, distant, yet undeniable, the silhouettes of armored columns moving like a river of steel. The voice had spoken truth. The reinforcements were real, and they were coming fast. The A-10 dove before he could even give orders, engines howling as it streaked across the sky, its cannon thundering as it rained fire into the lead. Vehicles' explosions ripping through the convoy flames, rising high enough to paint the clouds. Yet for every truck destroyed, more rolled forward. The enemy force was vast, larger than anything the soldiers had expected, and their commander clenched his jaw because now he realized the mission had been doomed not only by the valley itself but by the sheer scale of the enemy hidden beyond it. Still the pilot pressed on, weaving through smoke-dodging rockets, cutting into the convoy with fury that seemed endless. Her skill unmatched, her strikes precise, her resolve unshakable. The soldiers cheered as each blast lit the horizon. But the commander remained silent because the more he watched her, the more he felt unease. No ordinary human could fight like this. No ordinary pilot could know what she knew, or fly with such certainty in the face of such overwhelming firepower. He turned to his radio and demanded answers again from headquarters, but the only reply was static, followed by denial. Once more they insisted no support was authorized. They insisted no pilot had been dispatched. They insisted no A-10 had even left the base. The commander stared at the smoking horizon, his knuckles white around the radio because either headquarters was lying or this pilot truly had appeared from nowhere. The enemy adapted to her strikes, dragging anti-air weapons into position, heavy launchers mounted on ridges, missiles streaking upward in desperate arcs. The sky filled with fire as the A-10 twisted and rolled, each movement defying its design. The soldiers below could scarcely breathe as they watched the plane slip through every trap, each missile missing by a fraction, each explosion lighting the SK. The desert night stretched like an endless sea of shadows and heat, the kind of silence that could snap at any second with the roar of fire or the crack of rifles, and the men who waited in the valley knew it. They were soldiers hardened by years. Of battles, men who had seen villages rise and fall under the hammer of war. Yet even they could sense that something about this mission was different and heavier than the ones before them. The general who had briefed them only hours ago had spoken, in the kind of tone that buried hope beneath duty. He had stood before them, his jaw set, his eyes locked on the map, where the red lines spread like veins across the enemy stronghold, and he had said words that stuck into the hearts of every man gathered. "Mission impossible," he declared, as if stamping a final verdict on their fate, and though soldiers were taught never to flinch at death, each man felt the chill, as if he had been handed a one-way ticket into the abyss. But orders were orders. And so, the units prepared their gear-checking rifles, counting rounds, strapping packs, and whispering to themselves the quiet promises that men make when they know tomorrow may never come. Promises of returning home, of seeing faces they miss, of breathing air that is not laced with smoke and ash. Yet as the preparations went on, none could shake the echo of the general's words, because impossible carried the weight of doom. The valley floor where they were positioned was treacherous, the ridges above, crawling with hostile fighters hidden in caves and trenches, eyes watching every movement. The soldiers knew that once dawn broke, the enemy would have the high ground, and they would be trapped like prey in an open snare. But there was no turning. Back the mission had been set in stone, a push through the valley, a strike into the fortress, a desperate gamble to cut the enemy command before it could unleash chaos on the nearby cities. Whispers passed among the men that they were being sent to die, that no one could survive such a push, that the general had already written them off as martyrs, whose names would be carved in stone and forgotten in time. And as the night dragged into its final hours, the sky began to lighten the horizon, bleeding from black to gray to red like a wound that would not close. Each man tightened his grip on his weapon and prayed silently for strength, because they knew when the sun rose, the slaughter would begin. When the first shots cracked from the ridge, the valley exploded with thunder, dirt, and smoke rising like waves. The soldiers dove for cover, firing back into the unseen shadows above. But the enemy fire was relentless, machine guns spitting from hidden nests, mortars crashing into the ground, the earth itself trembling under the violence. And in those moments, every man realized the truth of the generals. Words impossible was not a warning. It was a prophecy. The radio crackled with frantic calls, men screaming for cover units breaking, apart medics rushing to drag the wounded from the field. And yet the enemy pressure only grew stronger each passing second, like a storm that would never run dry. And with every blast, more of the valley crumbled, more bodies fell, more voices faded into silence, until it seemed the mission would not even last beyond the morning sun. Still they fought with the last of their courage, pushing forward, crawling through dust, firing blindly into the ridges above, because surrender was not an option. To them they were bound by the oath to fight until their breath gave out and their hearts stopped beating. And though despair gnawed at their bones, though the sky itself seemed to press down upon them, there flickered in their eyes a defiance that refused to die. The commander on the ground shouted through the chaos, urging the men to keep moving, to hold the line, but even he could see the walls closing in the valley, narrowing the fire, intensifying the enemy numbers, overwhelming every tactic, every ounce of strength he possessed. And as he glanced toward the horizon through the smoke-filled sky, he realized that they were minutes away from annihilation. And then the sound came, a low rumble, at first hidden beneath the roar of battle, growing louder with each passing heartbeat. It was not the scream of mortars or the thunder of rifles. It was something deeper, something heavier, a sound that made both friend and foe lift their heads and search the heavens above. The soldiers felt it in their chests before they could see it, the vibration shaking through their armor, through the ground itself, until eyes caught a shadow cutting across the sun, a shape descending with wings wide and presence undeniable. It was an aircraft, not just any aircraft, but a beast of steel and fire. The unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 slicing through the haze, its engines growling with the promise of devastation, and at its helm sat a pilot unseen by those below, a pilot whose arrival was not foretold, not ordered, not part of any plan. The men on the valley floor froze as hope flickered in their eyes for the first time since the mission began. Yet none knew who commanded that machine of war. None could guess what fate had just arrived, in the form of that roaring thunder. And as the A-10 dipped lower, its cannons glinting in the light, every man held his breath, because the tide of the battle was about to change in ways they could not yet imagine. The roar of the engines split the sky like a warning from the heavens, the sound rolling across the valley, drowning out the cries of men and the crack of rifles. The soldiers who moments ago had been pinned down with no chance of survival lifted their heads, their eyes wide with disbelief. The silhouette of the A-10 loomed above them. Wings stretching like the arms of a giant, the cannon mounted on its nose gleaming as sunlight caught its steel form. The beast of the sky had come, and its presence alone shifted the tide of the moment. The enemy fighters hidden in their trenches and caves faltered for the first time since dawn began. They hesitated, their fire slowing as the growl of the engines shook their resolve. The A-10 dipped lower, carving across the ridges, and suddenly its cannon unleashed the voice of death, a guttural roar of shells tearing through stone and steel. The mountain itself seemed to shatter under the fury dirt, and smoke erupting into the sky like a volcano of fire. The soldiers below shielded. Their faces as fragments rained upon them, yet their hearts surged with hope, because the impossible was no longer a certainty. The commander on the ground shouted into the radio, his voice breaking with urgency, demanding to know who was piloting the craft, because no support had been promised. No airstrike had been approved. And yet here was salvation, tearing through the enemy line. The radio crackled back with silence, nothing but static filling his ears. The mystery deepening as the A-10 made another pass, its engines howling, its cannons screaming, and with each sweep more of the enemy fell back, scrambling from their positions, abandoning the nests they had sworn to hold. The soldiers rallied behind the sudden fury pressing forward, with renewed strength moving from cover to cover, pushing through the valley as if pulled by the shadow above. But even as they advanced, the commander could not shake the question that hammered in his mind. Who was this pilot who had appeared without orders, who had descended into the jaws of death when every other calculation had condemned them all to be lost? The question burned, and yet the answer remained hidden, cloaked within the armored beast soaring above their heads. Enemy mortars fired desperately into the sky, but the A-10 moved like a predator, unshaken and unbroken, twisting through the smoke, diving low to deliver strikes that ripped open enemy strongholds. The ground quaked with each burst, and still the mysterious pilot remained silent. No call sign, no name, no declaration. Only the roar of the engines and the thunder of fire. The soldiers whispered among themselves, even as they fought, some saying the pilot was an angel sent to save them, others swearing it was a ghost of war, a spirit returned to even the scales. Through the haze, the commander caught sight of the enemy leader, perched high on the ridge, a figure directing the chaos, shouting orders, waving arms to rally his fighters. But the A-10 circled again, descending. With purpose, and in a flash, the ridge exploded in fire, the leader vanishing in the storm, the enemy lines shattered and broke, panic spreading through them like wildfire. Men who had once believed victory, certain, now fled into the mountains, chased by the relentless storm from above. The battlefield transformed in minutes. The valley that had been a coffin now became a path forward. The soldiers pressed on their courage, fueled by the presence of their unknown savior. Yet the commander held back, his chest tight with unease, because though victory seemed within reach, the mystery of the pilot gnawed at him. Every mission had a chain of command, every strike had orders. Yet this pilot had emerged from nowhere, no briefing, no report, no trace of authorization. He raised his radio again, calling to headquarters, demanding answers, but once more only static answered him. Silence that stretched like a shadow across his mind. The battle was turning. Yet the mystery grew deeper and more unsettling. who would fly into a storm marked impossible, who would risk their life for men already written off as lost. The commander clenched his fists, because whoever this pilot was, they were not bound by rules. They were driven by something else, something that even he could not yet see. The A-10 soared once more across the sky, banking sharply, its engines echoing like drums of war, and as it passed over the valley, the commander caught sight of markings faint on its wings, markings he did not recognize, symbols that did not belong to any squadron. He knew his blood chilled for a moment because it meant this pilot was not part of the operation, not part of the chain of command, not part of anything he could account for. Still the S.